Checking my. Excellent.
All the troublemakers. It's a little late.
Oh yeah, well,
We're even 5 minutes ago.
that was too late a long time ago. Yes. Good.
So I see. I may have got myself in trouble. Again, what's else?
Well, guys, in respect of everybody's time and everybody sort of racing here and probably traffic, for those of you that are here live, and for those of you that are online, thank you for joining us. This is always sort of a fun and a fan favorite for me, is getting together starting on our Winter Wednesdays. By the way, if anybody sees admit so-and-so to the room on the screen behind me, if you could let me know, because somebody else may join in. But always a fan favorite when we start our Winter Wednesdays. Our Winter Wednesday series is designed to give our diving community and the members of it some extra information that might sometimes be hard to find or you might not even know exists. So for example, tonight's is on PADI's new tech programs. Well, if you're a PADI pro and you've done one of the online training bulletins, which we're required to do, you would hear about those things on a fairly regular basis. Oh, it's coming in November. No, it's now actually going to be January. Oh, no, it's now going to be August. But if you're not, you wouldn't hear any of that stuff because until it's ready, it's not ready. So you wouldn't hear anything about it unless it was written up in, say, the Undersea Journal or something. So we have a good lineup this year. We've got a whole bunch of stuff. After this one, our next one is Dr. Pollack, who is a favorite of the group, talking about the myths and facts about diving physiology. We've got I'm going to say a pro-level photographer, hopefully on the 24th of April, we're hoping to have Chris Cole, who's a marine historian, written several books and such, as well as Paul, who's going to do a rerun of his spinning techniques. Workshop that was
going to be the model again.
I might end up being the model again on the table. That was fun for all, but that's a good one, and that one will have a pool session associated with it as well, so you can go and watch Paul demonstrate some of the techniques, and then you can put them into practice. So that pool session will be on the 7th of April. One of the pool and pub type things will probably elongate it so we got a bit more time in the pool for people to practice. So but anyway, always fun to do this kind of stuff, get together as a gang and share some information. We're privileged to have David Craig here this evening. David is a master instructor now, I guess, right? Officially, let's congratulate him. Just recently achieved his master instructor rating, but he's also a tech instructor, a side mount instructor, among other things. And so he's going to share. David has probably one of the most detailed minds of anybody I know. And so when he sort of started digging into the tech programs, it wasn't 20 minutes before they were released and I had details in my inbox about what's changed and all that kind of stuff. So he's certainly one of the right guys to chat with about these programs. He's put together a short PowerPoint, but I'd encourage us to have conversation around some of these things. It's not David will stand up here and preach for an hour. It's really conversational. It's designed to sort of round out at the very beginning for those that maybe aren't already on a tech diving path. Hey, what is tech diving? What does it involve? What does it do? And then, is it right for me? And then he'll talk about some of the new PADI programs, what's in them, some of the changes, and that'll just, again, partly be discussion. If you have questions, I encourage you to ask them. That's the point of this, is to ask the questions. If you have it, somebody else in the room probably has it as well. So it's helpful for us to share those. So please speak up. Given that we've got both online and in-room presence, I will sort of stay up at the front. If I see something in the chat, I'll try and bring it up there. But if you guys have a question, also be mindful that it's a bit of a distance to the computer where the speaker is. So I may have to repeat the question just for everybody's benefit. Okay, sorry.
I said Tammy heard me just fine.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. You could have whispered that; she'd have heard you. All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to David and let him walk us through. I'll get our slide presentation put up here in a second while he introduces himself. Go for it, David.
And right, so I'm David. So I'm one of the tech instructors here at Floating Flag. So again, just like Brad said, one of the things that's been in the works with PADI for the past 2 years is revising the tech program. So they finally released that in the fall, just before Christmas, right around the big industry conference called NEMA at the end of November. So it sort of came out right after that. So I had a chance to kind of go through it over the holidays and sort of highlight sort of what the new features are. Some things may be of interest to people, new gear configurations, new courses that may be of interest to people depending on what they want to do with their tech guide.
Oops, I think I probably have to click on that. There we go.
Right.
I'm going to go back one. One more.
There we go.
There you go.
All right. So it's helpful to understand what is tech diving. So we're starting with what recreational diving is. So when we talk about recreational diving, we're talking about diving to a maximum depth of 130 feet and being able to ascend to the surface at any point during that dive. So that's essentially a no-stop dive, using air or enriched air, nitrox as one of your gases. And then if you're doing any kind of penetration, you're staying within kind of the natural light zone. So for example, if you're in a cavern, staying within where the light comes in from the cavern and sort of the total distance down from the surface and into your penetration area is a total of 130 linear feet. So you can't go down, say, to 100 feet and then go 40 feet into a cavern. That's no longer a recreational dive. Next slide.
You try doing it on your own there. Nope.
All right, so then technical diving is really anything that's not recreational diving. So diving beyond 130 feet, having to complete decompression on your way up, decompression stops. Diving in any kind of overhead environment beyond 130 feet. So we think about sort of advanced wreck penetration or cave diving. Talking about technical diving, then using variable gas mixtures during a dive. So multiple types of gas or multiple oxygen concentrations or trimix concentrations over a dive. So one thing tech diving is it's not about just exceeding limits. So you're not just going to try and set, say, a personal best for depth or just do something, go into an overhead environment just because it's there. You want to make sure that you have the proper training and understand the proper procedures and protocols for the type of diving you want to do. And then the other thing to understand is that tech diving is not for everyone. So PADI will generally tell you that sort of any of their specialties, you should take, you'll have fun, you'll enjoy it. Might freeze your butt off on a nice diving course, but you'll have fun underwater. But tech diving is sort of the one course where they'll say that, it's not necessarily for everybody just because of the risks and sort of extra diligence involved. So that's also something you sort of have to weigh if you're interested in taking tech diving. Next slide. This is some of the instruction staff that are sort of involved in tech diving with the shop. So there's myself. So I'm a side mount instructor and a Tec 50 instructor. We also have Dale McKnight, who is a PADI Trimix instructor. We have Brad, will be sort of working as a tech certified assistant on courses for various courses. We may see him out for a variety of the tech courses that we offer. And then you might, if you met Paul Finch, you might not realize that he's actually a PADI cavern instructor. So if you're interested in doing the PADI cavern diver, course, you can certainly talk to him about it. Not really anywhere locally here where you can really do it, so you sort of be looking at going down to Florida or somewhere else in the US to do that course. If it's something you're interested in, and you, I'd say reach out to Paul and he can give you some of that information. Next slide. So where are some of our tech diving opportunities? So locally we have several places. I just listed a few that we go to regularly. So Tobermory, you know, we have the Arabia and the Forest City as two of the deeper dives there. But even, you know, if you're on, say, the Niagara 2 and you just want to do a longer dive on the Niagara 2 with technical training, you can do that and then just do decompression stops on your way up. And then Picton, quite a few deeper wrecks out in Picton. They are kind of all in the recreational depth, but just with the depth and cold, having technical training can be beneficial. Again, just being able to possibly stay longer and then completing decompression on your way back up as you sort of do your survey of the wreck. And then for those that have been to Gilboa, Gilboa is in Ohio, just south of Toledo. And it's a very large quarry. They have two sides. They have a shallow side, which is about 60 feet. And then they have another shelf that drops off down to 130 feet or maybe even deeper than 130 feet. So if you wanted to dive the deep side, certainly be an option to be able to do sort of technical diving there, kind of in a confined environment. Sort of as international trips, just sort of within the next couple of years. So Truck Lagoon's been added back to the trip schedule. So it's planned for January 2026, so 2 years from now. So, you know, we just got back from that trip. Basically, it was this time last year. We were on our way back or just getting back from that trip. So for those of you that like history and like wrecks, it's certainly a must-see dive destination with all the Japanese World War II wrecks that are sunk there, all the artifacts and all the artifacts and sort of all the other sort of interesting things that you can see on those wrecks. And then those that have been to Saba before, so Sea Saba, one of the dive centers on the island, is under new ownership, and so they're starting to look at promoting more technical diving. Just there's quite a few deeper pinnacles around the island that they visit frequently. So those of you that maybe been there, you've probably maybe been down to some of the top of the pinnacles that sort of top out at 100 feet. But if you were to then go down to the bottom of the pinnacles, you'd be looking at going down to 130, 140 feet. So there's sort of an opportunity for technical diving there, and it's something they're looking at sort of expanding as a business opportunity. So Saba is usually on the shop's itinerary as a yearly trip in October to coincide with See and Learn, which is kind of an educational seminar program that runs on the island for a couple of weeks at the end of October. So certainly something that would be if there's interest in, you know, enough people going tech diving, we can speak with the shop and make arrangements for, you know, doing some technical dives to some of the deeper pinnacles. Next slide. So there's a couple different kind of, just talk about some of the different courses that we have available, depending on where you are kind of in your tech diving journey or where you want to go. So if you're kind of in this sort of, you're sort of maybe sort of know a little bit about tech diving, but you're not sure yet. So you'd like to maybe kind of have sort of an experience first or do a try tech before fully committing to the full tech program. Or maybe you're not ready to purchase all the equipment yet, but you're ready to purchase some of the equipment. Or maybe you're just uncertain about sort of maybe how your skills will be and you want to sort of take like a foundational course first just to build some skills, and then go off and practice for a bit and then come back and do the tech course. I want to hit the space bar, Brett. So there's kind of 4 kind of introductory courses that sort of offer that experience. So there's the PADI Self-Reliant Diver, Side Mount Diver, Tech Side Mount Diver, and Tec Basics. The key thing just with all these courses, none of these 4 courses actually qualify you to do any technical diving. They're all just sort of expose you to tech diving procedures and protocols to give you a sense of what's involved. with deck diving. And then if you're interested, maybe you just want to stay longer at depth, but you're fine kind of staying at around 130 feet. You don't really want to go deeper. Then you could take the Tec 40 program. Tec 40 used to be kind of a stepping stone on your way to Tec 45 or 50, but they've introduced some new equipment configurations at this level that kind of make it now, I'd say, more attractive for, you know, some divers that aren't interested in getting into doubles. And so they can still sort of dive, do some technical diving within kind of the 130-foot limit. And finally, if you're ready to kind of fully commit, full extended range diving, then we have the full Tec 40, 45, and 50 program. So self-reliant diver, so you might be familiar with this. Sometimes it's called solo diver, sometimes it's called self-reliant diver. This course is really about building your skills to be more self-reliant and independent when you're diving. So this is, you know, a good course. If you think about, you've been on a dive trip before, you know, if you look at the instructor or the dive master that's leading the dive, who is their buddy? Well, it's not really, it's kind of everyone and no one. So, you know, they're kind of relying on everyone, but they don't necessarily have any specific buddy. And then they're also responsible for that entire group. You know, if they're doing a guided tour, getting them out and then bringing them back.
There you go.
Perfect. There we go. A question, Richard?
We heard you there, Richard. Were you
No, it's all good. It's all good. Sorry.
no problem. Just weren't sure if you were trying to chat.
All good. Sorry.
No problem.
Thanks, no problem. All right, so this is a good course for building sort of those skills to be sort of more self-reliant underwater. So a lot of the course is built around tech concepts, so there's built around gas redundancy and gas planning. So looking at things like, you know, how long is my gas going to last for a dive underwater, looking at how your actual air consumption, doing a lot of those calculations that we actually do in tech as kind of an introductory. And sort of this would be, you know, if you're not sort of on the, if you're sort of on the fence, sort of from tech diving, this is kind of, because this is kind of a recreational course within kind of the advanced diver spectrum, there's not as much extra gear required as there would be if you wanted to commit more full tech training. So there are some extra gear requirements, which we'll talk about in a bit, but it's not necessarily as onerous as some of the, you know, say fully committing to tech training. This is a classroom session. This program, I don't believe, has e-learning yet. And it would be 3 dives with various skills on the dive. So it'll be things like switching to your redundant gas source, doing independent navigation, sending up a DSMB, all kind of things that you should have good foundational skills as kind of a diver. Lost it.
Oh, it's probably because I clicked on the chat.
If you're looking at maybe taking tech training in side mount, so side mount configuration is becoming increasingly popular both for recreational and technical diving. So side mount configuration does provide some additional versatility and flexibility compared to sort of the back mount doubles that you typically see people diving in when they're tech diving. So instead of having the tanks mounted on your back, they're basically along your lateral line, as you can see in the picture there. So you essentially have full access to the valves in front of you, and each tank is fully independent of each other. So that just gives you some flexibility for moving tanks around or having access to your regulators if there's some issues. So, you know, if you are interested, perhaps you have to sort of weigh, there's some pros and cons to back mount and pros and cons to side mount. So you have to sort of weigh what you think is best for you and sort of decide how you want to go. You know, one of the benefits of side mount is you can take your tanks off in the water and hand them up to the boat when you're getting out, which is maybe good if you don't feel like dragging yourself up a ladder with 2 steel 130s or even 2 steel 100s on your back. So that is sort of one thing I think a lot of people are sort of weighing when they're considering side mount. So this is a e-learning program now, and there'll be a bit of classroom time, just doing some gear setup and review. And then it has a pool session and 3 open water dives. And then if you are interested in doing tech training and side mount configuration, there's a tech side mount course. So this is a sort of a foundational skills course. So it's really giving you the skills to execute tech dives and side mounts. So you'll go through, there's still some procedures and protocols that you go through in the e-learning, and then when you get into the water, you'll sort of get experience handling 1 deco cylinder and then moving to handling 2 deco cylinders at the same time, which you would do if you were to go to the full Tech 50 program. So this is a good, again, this is a good foundational course. It's a good prep course. It'll really set you up for success in the Tech 40, 45, 50 program if you were to do it in side mounts. So again, you have e-learning, confined water session, and then if you already have a PADI side mount diver certification, it's just 2 open water dives. And one of the good things about this course is that basically you can credit some of your learning towards Tech 40. So it just means you don't have to do some of the initial sort of practical applications again. You've already done them again. So it'll just be go in, do a refresher, and then move on to what's new within the Tech 40 program. So the new course that's part of the tech program is this Tec Basics. Tec Basics is fairly similar to Tech Side Mount in that it's really giving you an exposure to tech concepts and tech equipment so that you can sort of see what's involved in terms of planning and prep, and then going out and getting used to the equipment and doing some of the skills within a confined water environment, and then going out and doing 1 open water dive in that equipment. So this is sort of, you know, if you're going to do side or if you're going to do tech and back mount, this is kind of the equivalent now for a back mount diver. It's kind of a prep course. It's optional, but again, if you sort of wanted to try it out first and get sort of a taste of what tech is like, this would be a good option. Good option for you. And then one other thing is that the use of a deco cylinder within the program is optional. So if you just wanted to use, again, just basically the doubles, didn't want to commit to using a deco cylinder, that would be an option as well. So this, again, this has an e-learning component, confined water dive, and open water dive. And again, a lot of the skills you do in Tech Basics then carry on to Tech 40. So, you know, having the certification would then be a credit for you to move on to the Tech 40 program.
David, would it be safe to say there really are no other places or programs where somebody can learn how to dive doubles or that kind of thing? This is kind of getting you into that realm. Hey, here's the gear, here's how it's configured, here's how you use it. Let's go practice. Now get ready, because as you're going to do your Tech 40 program, you don't want to be flopping all over the place. It's a, as you said, a bit of a prep course to get you ready so that you'll probably glide through Tech 40. It's not like you have to do it and then practice for 3 years, but it gives you a solid introduction.
So I mean, before there's no really sort of open water doubles program anywhere. So yeah, it was basically, oh, I'm in back mount doubles and I go to the pool and I put my doubles on for the first time, and maybe I do okay, maybe I don't know. Right. And then maybe you have to redo that first Tech 40 dive a couple times to get things nailed down. So that's kind of the sort of a perk of the side mount, is that they have kind of a, because the side mount was new and sort of the side mount instructor sort of recognized the side mount, the person who wrote the side mount manual sort of foresaw this being an issue. We sort of was able to develop these programs and have them as preparatory courses for you for tech diving, but there's really nothing for back mount doubles. So this is kind of what you would use now. This is kind of what you would have now for back mount doubles if you wanted to sort of ease yourself into the tech programs. So talking about the Tech Deep program, so it is still broken up into 3 levels: Tech 40, 45, and 50. Everything is now e-learning. So Tech Basics is e-learning, 40, 45, and 50 are now e-learning as well. So those of you taking an e-learning course, you buy the online crew pack, you work through it at your own pace. There's online knowledge reviews you have to get 100% on, continue on, and then once you've done everything, there's an exam that unlocks and you do the exam online, and you have all your supporting material as kind of PDFs or JPEGs as kind of supporting material within the e-learning. So one new thing at the Tec 40 level, there's a new gear option, which we'll talk a bit more about in a bit. So now you can use a single tank with a single first stage, and you can use a bailout bottle as your redundant gas supply. We'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. There are now some more dry land workshops. So before we even get in the water for the first dive, we really just do everything on shore and sort of walk through the whole dive. So you're going to do your air share on land. You're going to do a valve shutdown drill on land. You're really going to walk through the whole dive on land before you actually get in the water and do it. So you can talk through everything and get a sense of you know, possibly where there's problems, or at least kind of be a little more familiar with what needs to be done before you get in the water. For those of you that are not big fans of mathematics, so there's sort of a reduced emphasis on formulas. There is, I'm not going to say it's gone away completely. There's still math you have to do. You still have to calculate SAC rates. For those of you that have done the old program, all the manual dive planning has gone away, which I'm sure you're happy, not happy about, because now no one else has to suffer through it. And there's no real math on the exams anymore. It's all the way it's all multiple choice now, and they just don't ask any math questions. So still have to know how to calculate a SAC rate. You know, we still kind of expose you how to do things like calculating CNS and OTUs, which are sort of oxygen exposure, but there's not really the same emphasis on math. And the reason for that is that there's more emphasis on using dive planning software to track all that. So you need to understand the math to make sure that your dive planning software is telling you the right thing. Otherwise, you don't need to have that sense that the dive software is working properly, or otherwise it can put you in a possibly dangerous situation where you go and do a dive you're not in a safe position to do, possibly because of O2 exposure or something else. So we'll spend more time looking at dive planning software and how to use dive planning software for various calculations and contingency planning. Many of the skills are now sort of dive flexible skills, so you really only have to do them once on one of the open water dives. So things like, there used to be on every dive, you know, there was setting up a DSMB as a team exercise. Well, now you have to do it, everyone has to do it once on at least one of the dives. So it's not as, you know, you'll do all this stuff in the confined water and then really do it once in open water. So a lot of the dives in open water are really more focused on going down, kind of executing the dive the way you would do it normally, you know, encountering problems, handling problems, and then ascending. Well, some of the other things that are kind of new in the program, so there's a lot more emphasis on finning and propulsion techniques. So one of the things we kind of spend in that really before we get in the water is working on various propulsions. So frog kicks, back kicks, helicopter turns, sort of all the kind of kicks you need as kind of a tech diver to be able to sort of propel yourself and position yourself in the water. Doing rescue exercises for tech divers. So sort of how to actually, you know, if you have to actually get a tech diver out of the water, going through the steps of actually rescuing them. Actually passing and sharing deco cylinders with teammates. So we talked a lot about that in the old program, but we never actually did it. So now there's actually going to be, oh, your teammate cylinder is free flowing, or it's not, this valve's not opening. So when you're done with one of yours, you're going to pass it to the other teammate, maybe take their dead one, just as balanced, just so that everybody's balanced, sort of get some experience with that. And then there's sort of some more generous allowance with some of the time skills. So for some of you that have done valve shutdown drills, at Tec 40, there is no longer a time requirement for your shutdown. And then at Tec 45 and 50, it's 2 minutes back mounts. So much more generous with their timing requirements, which was quite a painful thing for those of you that did the course.
Yeah.
Or the water.
Oh, and the first time in doubles, and you've got 45 seconds to shut down
60,
3 valves.
60 the first time.
Yeah.
So they sort of, that was one of the big things, is they were actually 2023, they were doing a webinar, and they're like, literally, if you're in the building, come see us and tell us what you think the timing should be, because we're still working out. We're still trying to decide internally, so we need more feedback. So that's so again, sort of one of the sort of things they sort of listened to people's issues with and took it to heart with the new program. So equipment options for the tech program. So this applies sort of for Tec Basics and the tech, well, as it's noted there. So the typical most common configurations. So back mount doubles with an isolator manifold in the middle, so you can isolate both sides of the tanks. And then side mount configuration. So at the Tec Basics and Tec 40 level, there are some single cylinder configurations that you can do the course in. So you can do the course in a single cylinder configuration with a dual outlet valve or an H valve. If you've been in the shop, you may have seen one of these. It's basically got two ports, 2 valves on the tank and 2 handles. So you still need 2 independent first stages, second stages. It's kind of a stepping stone to actually going to isolator, sort of back mount doubles with an isolator manifold at the Tec 45 level. So that is an option. And then this new option they have is a single cylinder configuration with a single outlet valve. So sort of a standard tank and sort of your standard regulator, and then using a bailout cylinder. So your bailout cylinder is effectively, if your main tank, there's a problem with it, you'll shut it off, you'll switch to the bailout, and then you're heading to the surface, breathing the bailout gas. So if you have a tank that's 80 cubic feet or larger, it doubles as your bailout and depot at Tec Basics and Tec 40 level. So this would only mean you really have your normal kind of recreational rig with a few minor tweaks. And then you would have your bailout with a bailout reg on it, which would be a first stage, second stage, and SPG, and then the rigging to clip it to your VCD. Now, if you wanted to use smaller tanks, you can do that too. So if you wanted to use like a 40 as a bailout and a 40 as an eco cylinder, that's fine. You just need 2 regulators for each of those tanks and the rigging kits to be able to do that. That's also an option if you wanted to, but having just kind of the 80 cubic foot as a bailout kind of at least maybe gives you some options if you don't want to, change too much with your gear. That sort of going with the bailout tank gives you sort of that redundancy out of the, sort of gives you that redundancy you need to be able to sort of do deck diving within that 130-foot range or shallower. So the only thing to be mindful of is that gas and that bailout needs to be breathable at your deepest depth on the dive. So normally it would probably be the same gas as what's in your back tank, or lower blend of nitrox, depending on what you're diving. So the general course structure, so there's e-learning, and there'll be a bit of classroom just for some things. We have to go through the dive planning software, so that would be done in the classroom session. There's a confined water dive for each class, go through all the skills you need for that level. And then there's 3 additional training dives. And then usually the last dive of each class is a decompression dive. And then I think at Tec 50, the last 2 dives are decompression dives. So you sort of build up your skills, and then as your final dive, you actually go up to a decompression dive at that level. And then we have these practical application sessions that we have before each training dive. So things we're going to do is sort of do your gear setup and review, sort of demonstrate how you set everything up, just give a chance for comments and feedback from the rest of your teammates, dry running through all the skills, and then going over dive planning, sort of thinking through the dive, what could go wrong, what are sort of your contingencies, how you're going to manage and handle problems on the dive. So Tec 40, is a maximum depth of 130 feet. And you can use a single cylinder of decompression gas with up to 50% oxygen for your decompression. And then you can make decompression dives up to a maximum of 10 minutes of decompression using a decompression gas, or up to 15 minutes if you're going to decompress on your bottom gas. So this is again something where if you're going to be in a single tank with a bailout cylinder and you have bottom gas in both cylinders, you can now have up to 15 minutes of decompression instead of the 10 minutes where you're restricted if you're using a higher blend of nitrox. So they've sort of, again, Tec 40 used to be more of a stepping stone, but they kind of opened it up a bit more to make it kind of more viable for people that maybe don't want to go past the 130-foot range, just sort of giving those divers some more options to be able to do sort of longer dives and sort of have some, 10 minutes of decompression. It didn't take long to rack that up if you were using a decompression gas, but 15 minutes is a bit, again, that's a little more meaningful in terms of time you can stay on the bottom. Tec 45, so you can make single and repetitive decompression dives, so maximum depth of 150 feet. And at this level, you need to be in either side mount or back mount doubles with an isolator. So depending on what you're thinking, as sort of a tech progression, you really want to start the Tec 40 program in the gear you're going to use for the rest of the courses you want to take. That's not to say that if you start in a single tank, you want to go to doubles in Tec 45, that's fine. But it just means you are sort of starting from square one a little bit, just having to learn the doubles configuration for the Tec 45 level before you go out and do the dives. And then you can use the single decompression gas up to 100% oxygen for decompression. And then at Tec 50, you can make multiple stop decompression dives up to 165 feet using up to 2 decompression gases for those dives. Another new thing they've introduced is a Trimix option. So Trimix is a combination of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium. And the reason we add helium into the gas is to reduce the gas density of what you're breathing and also reduce the risk of narcosis. So you probably remember from some of your other training that we sort of consider nitrox to be, or air to be narcotic past 100 feet. So one way that we can reduce that narcotic effect is by adding helium. Helium is not, they say helium is not narcotic, but it is. All gases are narcotic to some degree, but you got to go really deep for helium to be narcotic. So taking the nitrogen out and replacing it with helium reduces that narcotic effect. And basically diving Trimix, it's kind of like, for me, it's like, someone turns on a light switch in your head. If you're down in depth, you don't necessarily feel narcs, but there is a big difference doing a dive on air or nitrox and going back and doing that same dive on Trimix. It's like, some people say it's like the difference between standard definition television and high definition television. It's just that your head is that much more clear using the Trimix. You don't necessarily realize it until you've actually done it. And then one of the things that is sort of getting a lot more attention now is sort of gas density of what you're breathing. So this just affects how hard you're having to breathe. So the more dense the gas is, the more you have to work to breathe, and the less efficient possibly the exchange of gases is happening in your lungs. So as part of that, the way to reduce the gas density is, again, to introduce helium into your gas, because helium is less dense than nitrogen and oxygen, so that helps to reduce the gas density of what you're breathing. So those are kind of the two main benefits of Trimix. So you do have the option of doing Tec 40, 45, and 50 with that should be Trimix option, not nitrox option. So at Tec 40 and 45, you need to have a minimum of 21% oxygen in your tank and a maximum of 35% helium. And then at Tec 50, you're allowed to go up to a maximum of 40% helium. So you do not need to do, like, if you wanted to do Trimix, you do not need to do like 40, 45, and 50 at Trimix. If you wanted to do 40 and 45 at sort of the regular option and then do 50 as a Trimix option, that would be fine. Then you just be qualified to use Trimix really at Tec 50 in any previous level that you were at. Really, you'll see other training agencies say that if you're going past 100 feet, you really should be on Trimix just because of gas densities and narcosis effect. But, you know, you have to, sort of the general industry standard is at least from a gas density perspective, 145 feet is kind of the limit of where you should be thinking about, well, I should probably be thinking about maybe going on to Trimix now versus just being on air or nitrox at that level. So,
Dave, with that being a Tec 50 diver now, is there an option to add that in? Like come back and do just the Trimix portion into the 50, or is there?
I would have to do the Tec 50 class again with the Trimix option.
Okay. That was my curiosity.
Yeah. So, you know, I'd say Tec 40 Trimix may or may not be value. There's some other things you need to consider. There's the cost of Trimix. There's some other additional equipment requirements. You know, one thing you're looking at is having a separate inflation system for your dry suit. For your dry suit, if you're wearing a dry suit. You do have to weigh that. So certainly, probably depending on 45 or 50, depending on where you want to stop, you might want to think about Trimix. And then there is still the, you know, the Trimix courses. So Trimix 65 and the full Trimix course, which are options as well, depending on what your kind of interests are. So if you are sort of interested in the Trimix option, just, you know, let the shop know, just so we're sort of look at sort of from a practical matter. I mean, once you put Trimix kind of into a set of tanks, those tanks are Trimix tanks for all intents and purposes, because Trimix is just too expensive to be draining them and refilling them and putting something else in. So if you want to do other dives that aren't Trimix dives, you're potentially looking at having, you know, you have a set of doubles that's nitrox doubles and a set that's Trimix doubles. So you have to sort of weigh some of that pros and cons as well.
So you're not recommending the high definition Gulliver's experience?
Well, you never know. You might see some, you know, you see those snails, there might be something really small that you see on that helium. So
done.
Some of the equipment requirements. So if you're interested in self-reliant diver, so you can take self-reliant diver in any of the Tec configurations we've talked about, except the H valve configuration. So you need to have a fully redundant gas source to take self-reliant diver. And then you will need redundant audible and visual signaling devices. So I just listed some examples there. So you need an SMB for the program anyway. So you should have an SMB and then maybe a mirror, and then a whistle, and the diver will alert the quacker. Well, you're familiar with the quackers as your audible devices. And you do need to have a redundant sort of dive computer or timing device as well for that class. If you are interested in side mount, so side mount, you do need a specialty side mount BCD. The air needs to be more out near your lower back, around your butt, because that's where the center of gravity is in the tanks for the most part on the dive. So there's specialty side mount BCDs that you need for that. And then you also need sort of 2 independent regulators that are kind of rigged and configured for side mount as well. And then if you are going to do Tec side mount, the Tec side mount program does have a 2-cylinder requirement. So you would need to have 2 deco cylinders for the Tec side mount program. So for Tec Basics and Tec Deep, you need to, for your primary regulator, you do need to have a 7-foot hose, or long hose as it's sort of generally called. So that would be on your primary second stage. So if you were to do one of the single tank configurations, you would need to get a 7-foot hose retrofitted onto your existing regulator, just because you'll need that for doing air shares. And then for Tec Basics, Tec 40 and 45, you need to have 1 deco bailout cylinder. Again, the deco cylinder is optional for Tec Basics, but you would need a bailout cylinder if you're in that single tank configuration with the single outlet valve. So you that is your redundant gas source at the Tec Basics level or the Tec 40 level. And then when you get to Tec 50, you'll need 2 deco cylinders. So that basically, a deco cylinder is going to be a cylinder usually about 40 cubic feet. Then it'll need to have rigging to be able to clip it off to your VCD. And then you'll have a regulator that is a first stage, second stage, and then an SPG, sort of that minimum for decompression cylinder. You also need to have sort of redundant buoyancy. So diving up here, for most people, that'll be the Drysuits. You can also get a redundant bladder VCD as well. There's various options in both back mount and side mount for isolator or for doubles. If you're in a single tank configuration, there's some flexibility on this because you're generally not as significantly overweighted as you are compared to sort of side mounts or people in back mount doubles. So as long as your kind of existing jacket BCD can provide enough lift with the, say you're in the, a tank in your bailout tank, then you're probably okay. If you were to say do it in the wetsuit. You'll need a backup mask and redundant computers, which we'll look at in a second. And then, if we're taking the course up here, there are generally longer dives for training dives. And when you're on deco, you're sitting still and not moving. So you be a tendency to get cold. So really a dry suit is, if you're interested in doing the course, really a dry suit up here is pretty much almost required equipment just for your thermal comfort. We had a couple guys that went to truck last year. They toughed it out in wetsuits. So, but it's not something I would recommend as a long-term option, just for comfort, being able to do skills and being able to respond to problems.
David, there was a question in here from one of our online participants about accelerated decompression. What programs is it allowed in now, or is it only at Tec 50?
So I believe it's Tec 45 and 50.
45 and 50.
It's accelerated decompression. Might be 40 as well. I'll check my slates kind of once we're done here. Well, there's a few other questions in the chat.
No, they're more discussions about side mount rules, back mount rocks, that kind of stuff. So really, I haven't really interrupted you for those.
Real divers don't let other divers.
Yeah.
So from a computer perspective, there's a couple different options. So what I generally recommend is you have two multi-gas dive computers. So this would be like a Shearwater, a Perdix 2, or the Taric, or the Petrol 3. Really having two dive computers, multi-gas dive computers, I know there's a big upfront cost to that, but if you're going to be doing a lot of tech diving, it's just so much easier having two computers that are just ticking away with the same profile side by side and not having to worry about carrying slates or backup plans, worrying about having to fail back to backup plan or a lot of timer.
And if people don't think it happens, I mean, I've been on tech dives where a computer has pooched.
We had it happen in truck on one of the training dives. The other students had their computer die.
Yeah. So it does happen. So having that backup computer, right now you still have a fully, doesn't mean you have to end the dive, or depends where you are in the profile and what the management was, but you've now got, a whole second redundant computer. The chances of two of them failing on one dive are pretty slim. So we were able to finish those dives without having to interrupt, the basic profile.
So the other sort of common option that a lot of people will do at the outset is they'll have a multi-gas computer, and then you can use your existing your computer in gauge mode with the backup plan written on a slate. So if you've got a Zoop, for example, you can put your Zoop into gauge mode. It'll do your depth of time. And if your Shearwater dies, it'll just use your Zoop's depth and bottom time and follow your run time and what your slate tells you for deco coming back up. And your third option is two computers in gauge mode with primary and backup dive plans, which I would say is probably not recommended. Your computers, those multi-gas computers, give you a lot of information for things like O2 exposure, You know, if you look at the shear water, you've got those graphs. Shear waters that are good for even contingency planning. If you think you got to get out of the water quicker, you can look at some of the gradient factor information and change it, or make a risk assessment of how oversaturated you might be getting out of the water that you won't really have with two computers engaged mode. And then two computers engaged mode, you basically got to go back and feed your full dive plan back into dive planning software to actually get all those numbers spit out. And again, it's kind of an estimate, since it's, you know, think again why we recommend computers, while they track your whole profile over the course of the dive, kind of having a paper plan and then going back and feeding that actual dive plan back into a dive planning software kind of takes out some of that accurate tracking that happens with an actual multi-gas dive computer, and kind of introduces some uncertainty. From a logistics perspective, so there will be some classroom time for the practical applications. We'll have to see how people do with the e-learning. You know, if they get it or don't get it. It's really basically everything before was kind of, we sat here and we taught it. So now we're kind of line that PADI's put together a good e-learning program for you to understand the material that you know sense. So we'll see how that then goes, and whether we need sort of other additional
Yep, thanks.
And then dives would be done kind of in a variety of locations. There's increasing depth requirements as you move through the course. So, you know, we have to do some of the sort of the finning techniques, propulsion techniques, that would sort of be done at Fernbrook or at Wayne Gretzky. And then Gulliver's Lake would sort of be for some of the confined water dives. And then Humber Bay, Welland-School Park, Cedar Hill, Tobermory would sort of be your site options for having to go deeper to various depths. And then, you know, we would basically be trying to do shore diving as much as possible. It's really only once you get into the Tec 50 where, you know, those last two dives, if you want to get sort of the full benefit out of the course, would want to be on a charter and say, go out to the Forest City in Arabia to do deeper dives.
The other one that may be a possibility that we have a couple trips going to is Gilboa.
Yes.
Their deep side of their quarry is about 120, 125 feet. You know, a little platform on the bottom there. Not fancy, but if you were doing certainly at a 40 and 45 level, you want to get some of those dives, you don't have to be at full max depth of say 145 to meet the full performance requirements. It's always nice to get one of those in, you know, closer to the end of your dive course, you know, to get down to see that railing on the Forest City is often a goal for divers and that kind of thing, or, you know, to go over the Dufferin Wall, or oftentimes you'll have a goal. Sure, it's nice to get closer to the max depth, but certainly for some of the interim stuff and practice, we went to Gilboa last year in October. Todd, who's online right now, he took us on sort of a tour. Paul Finch and I went and did a fairly extended dive on the deep side just to sort of evaluate it for technical courses training, and it was quite good. I mean, again, you don't get deeper than sort of 120, 125, but for most of the dives in those earlier programs, that's just fine.
So for the question about accelerated decompression, it is actually accelerated decompression now, right from Tec 40.
Okay.
So no more kind of sort of the initial program. It was sort of, you plan the whole dive on back gas, and then you just used a higher enriched air gas, sort of added conservatism to your dive, because you were essentially breathing it longer than you didn't really get into accelerated decompression until Tec 50. So that is it for my presentation. Thank you for everyone for coming. Does anyone have any other questions?
So there's always a question about gear. You know, that always comes up. I know I've had the chat already with Brian. I know there's a couple of the other folks, either online or what have you, that I've had ongoing chats with. For anybody that's interested, I do have a sheet that I can send out where we've tried to, I'm gonna say, categorize as best as possible the gear needs at the different course levels. So I'm gonna fire that off to David just to sort of double check now that there are some new gear configuration things. But generally speaking, it goes through the main requirements that you would need. Oh, I need double tanks, I need a manifold, I need bands, I need a stage bottle, I need a stage reg, I need a stage kit. So it walks you through each of those. Just because we want it to be more timeless, it's doesn't have quotes on it. And for example, when I sat down with Brian, I sent him the sheet in advance. We sat down and said, well, here's what do you already have? Well, I already have this, 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 and this. Fine. So we only had to quote 5 or 6 items from that whole list because those are the things he didn't have. So that would be the kind of thing where, hey, if you're interested in a tech course, what we did was, here, look at this, then come in, meet, we'll sit and talk about the things, and then I'll put a quote together and look at that. And, you know, even then, there are some other things that we often recommend, but aren't required equipment. For example, there was nothing in here that said you must have an analyzer. But it's probably a good idea if you're going to do a lot of this kind of diving to have your own analyzer, because you're going to be analyzing your gas a lot. So it's nice to have one. And most tech divers will tell you, yeah, you analyze it at the store after they blended it. But once it's sat for 24 hours, that blend may change a little bit. And if you're doing deeper stuff, that could make a big difference. So you're going to test it the next day before you dive, or, you know, that kind of thing. So, so an analyzer is an optional piece of equipment that we can quote you on. Again, you don't have to buy it. If you're on a course, it's probably not going to be necessary. Probably 8 of us have one already. However, eventually you'll want to get your own. I know Miro's bought one, for example, for the kind of diving that he chose, you know, a certain type based on the type of diving he's doing with rebreathers and things like that. So he got the new DiveSoft Blender Pro model, but we also have very simple ones. If you're not planning on doing Trimix, you don't need a Trimix analyzer. So there are a number of different choices there. But if you are going to plan to do Trimix, those analyzers are a bit more expensive. And so you might wait until you're partway through your course, or maybe do 40-45 as a nitrox, and then 50 you buy the analyzer. So there's a bunch of different strategies there, and that's sort of what Brian and I were going through the other day, which is when would be the right time to buy that, given that I have a financial advisor at home that might be looking at the credit card. So there are a few things like that that are worthy of consideration. And for some of you that may be in here this evening, I know there's at least a couple don't have a Drysuit yet. Well, that'll be another, you know, more significant purchase along your journey if you're going to do it in cold water. If you were just going to do it in truck, you know, that kind of thing, well, it might be, that's, you don't want to spend your whole week doing a course, and that's what you'd be doing if you were doing it all over there. So there may be other options, but those are the kind of things we can always talk about. And for those of you that don't have a Drysuit yet, you may be interested in knowing that we have a Drysuit program running in June up in Tobermory, where we're actually going to be using the Divers Den rental Drysuits. We'll run your course up there, fit you, take you out, do your open water dives, get your Drysuit certification, and then on the Sunday, we'll go out in a boat and do some boat diving. Some nice, easy sites, nothing crazy, but if you're not yet Drysuit certified, that's one way to get your certification without having bought a Drysuit. If you own one, fine, you can take it and use it, but that would be an interesting option for somebody that might want to do that. And then you could even rent that Drysuit for your Tobermory takeover if you were on that trip. So it's a couple things to think about for those not yet Drysuit divers.
I think looking at us.
Yeah. pretty much you too, but there may be, I don't know about all the guys online. I'm pretty sure that most of them probably had a Drysuit, but
so I guess one other thing worth mentioning there, we do have a fitting techniques
Yes.
Wednesday. I think it's the 1st of March is the.
March 27th is the workshop in here, and then
7th.
the 7th is the pool session.
So
So-
if you are interested, Tech, I would say this is not part of the course, but it's good. All did this, pre-COVID, sort of lot.
Yes.
Right. All set.
Just as COVID was hitting,
We're all
it
set
was
to go
in
to the pool.
February.
We're all set to go to the pool for the workshop, and then.
The
pool
first,
fed.
the first pool session made it, the second one never did. But yes, so I did talk with Paul, and I chatted about this, and so one of the things that he's gonna change the focus slightly on is most of the propulsion techniques that we're gonna cover this year in the workshop are about moving in the forwards direction. Because a lot of people got really discombobulated about, well, I want to learn how to go backwards. Yeah, but you don't know how to go forwards yet in these techniques, and you're trying to go backwards. So we sort of put a bit of the cart before the horse. So we're going to focus on the forward propulsion techniques, probably five different types of kicking techniques, main ones. Work on those. Once we get you going forward efficiently, then you can start saying, well, let me do that in reverse, but it will be a bit more natural as opposed to, well, I have no idea how to go forwards. Now I'm going to try and do it in reverse. It's like explaining something in backwards order, and it just didn't make sense. And people were trying it, and it was more frustrating than it was rewarding. So the idea is, hey, let's focus on some of these. And those spinning techniques, you know, the ones that Paul is an avid cave diver. And in fact, he is taking Tammy and I down. We're doing a cavern course. He's a cavern instructor, PADI cavern instructor. So that will be the first, other than ice diving, the first overhead environment course that the shop has run. And we're going as the guinea pigs to sort of say, hey, because we've had a lot of people say, I'd like to do that cavern course, but the logistics and all that stuff. So this is sort of the first one. So it'll be interesting. But what the finning techniques piece is really good, because he's going to teach techniques that are used by cave divers, you know, to ensure people aren't stirring up the bottom. And that's a big part of what we're doing here as well, isn't it? You're not really a tech diver if you go and there's an atomic bomb going off behind you. You know, you can call yourself a tech diver, but you might not really be, you know, looking the part.
Might be able to want to pump yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so that'll be a good workshop. Workshop is free. Pool and pub is just whatever the usual payment to get in, and which includes the weight, the fills, and stuff. So $35, I think, 35 for the pool and pub. So, which is optional. There's no certification for it. Just a chance to practice the techniques that we're going to show in the class. Cool. I'm gonna keep checking here. Anybody online have any questions? Here we go. What kind of timelines would be given reasonable to plan if going from beginning to Tech 50? There's just smoke coming out of David's head. We'll get back to you in a second. So well, basically, we did 40 and 45. Now, I will say we did this last year. It was a very compressed schedule, but you could do certainly 40 and 45. You could easily do in a season, and if you were Drysuit diver and could extend your season a little bit, you could probably even finish up a 50. I mean, each of them is 4 dives. So, you know, you've got at least 12 dives, and yeah, sure, we did one weekend, and we did
2 weekends.
We did 2 weekends. Yeah.
1 weekend.
Yeah. Cedar Hill and Tobermory. Cedar Hill, I think we did 2 each day, and that was in early May, so it was quite cold. Water was 34, 36. So I think we said it wasn't that much fun. We might wait till a little bit later, which is why I said that was for a specific agenda.
Realistically, like for some of the deeper, well, yeah, for some of the deeper stuff, I think you're more looking at like June.
Yeah,
to warm up enough. Even in a dry suit,
even in a dry suit, it's bitter. So
you're sitting there. Someone's sitting there doing skill. You're sitting there not moving.
Everybody's not moving.
That's the That's sort of the challenge is because you're not moving, you're gonna get colder faster than if you were just swimming around.
So maybe let me rephrase, because I know why the question is being asked. Would it be feasible to get 40, 45, and 50 done in a season? I think this has to do with the truck trip and,
I think
oh, how would I get stuff done before the
I
truck
think you
trip
could.
and,
Get it done this season, yes, depending on your flexibility by sort of the end of September or October.
okay,
So
so,
I mean, so I don't know, like, I mean, certainly. I guess if you're depending on what you want to look at depth limits, like, so the last dive for Tec 50. So the minimum depth is 120 feet, so you could do that dive
Forest
in
City,
Gilboa.
yep, Gilboa,
Do it in Forest City would be probably the ideal.
Yep.
Ideal place to do it, but you could also, if you had to, you could go down to Gilboa. Right, and do it on the deeper side.
Yep.
Of Gilboa, say into October.
and my understanding, there is even a little bit deeper area in Gilboa, we just didn't find it, but we asked about where it was, and you can apparently get to 130, 140 in there. We'll need to go and scope that out, but the main area where you go in, it's 122-ish, but if you curve around a little bit, there's another area over by where the tubes, you can drop off the wall there. Apparently it's a little bit deeper, so have to validate, but that sounds like a fun road trip. Yeah, so let's go, but yeah, so Adrian, hopefully you got all that. Probably doable all within one season is probably realistic, but it's definitely a lot of work, and that assumes that things go well, you know, for everybody. So there's always that caveat, and that the weather on the course dates that you have booked works out and all that kind of fun stuff. So there's a few caveats in there, but within one season is doable, given sort of where truck is in the timeline. Get started this year, and then, you know, if you had to finish up, we did a few course dives to finish a few things in truck with David there. So I don't know if he's planning on going back, but I might also be doing the tech instruction by then as well. I'm hoping that I'll have my own ticket by then, so hopefully one way or the other we can wrap everything up for those programs, most of it here, and then finish up if necessary over there.
What do we need?
Sorry,
What level of we truck?
well, I mean, truck, you can, the answer that truck will give you is, oh, open water diver certification, you can do whatever you want. No, I'm not kidding, but that is the answer. And then when you talk to the owner, goes, oh yeah, I've been bent so many times. Yeah, well, let's ask why, you know, like there's a few things. And I mean, I'm being a bit flippant, but that is his attitude. I have always required, since I know almost every dive will be to 100 feet or deeper. Now David didn't talk tons about the prerequisites, or maybe I missed that slide. I was maybe paying attention to some other technology here, but you have to have your deep diver certification anyway.
Well, you need deep dives or a deep diver.
Yeah.
Start Tech for you, deep diver certification or so many deep dives.
Right. So let's say you're going to have your deep diver certification. That takes you to 130. You could do truck, and we have had a number of people do truck as deep diver certified, no technical training at all. The dives, however, are going to be significantly shorter because you're going to run out of time. And what that means is you'll more or less be limited for the most part to surface level dives, no sort of swimming through some of the innards and stuff like that, because that's invariably where you're going to end up at 130 feet for 20 minutes while you're swimming through some stuff. So that's usually where you'll get. So your diving will be a little bit different, but you can do it with a deep diver certification. It's pretty much, I'd say, Chris, 90% of the dives are deeper than 100 feet at some point on the dive anyway. So you really want to have your deep diver cert to go. Practically speaking, I would say a minimum Tech 45. Practically speaking would be probably what you'd want. 50, bunch of us were what Rod could, Rod was asking if rescue is still a prerequisite as well,
Yes,
but
yes.
yes, and the answer is yes. But Rob was in truck as well. We had 50s and 100 mixes on pretty much most of the bigger dives. You know, not everyone. There's a few that are like, hey, we'll be 70 feet on this dive. Well, okay, I'll take my 50 just in case, but I'll leave the 100 on the boat. But so 45 minimum, I would say. 50 is probably a good target. You do not, however, need the Trimix option. It's not required. There are a couple of dives where the San Francisco Maru, if you want to do a bit more of an exploration, you're going to end up at 185. We were
165.
Yeah.
So
So you can do that. The deck of the San Francisco Maru at the bow is 165. You could certainly do that on Trimix. Helium is not cheap over there on a boat in the middle of nowhere, so you can expect it to be a $300-400 dive, single dive. However, you'll have a very clear head and really enjoy it, as David was talking about. A number of us did it on Trimix last year, and then a bunch of the other guys did it with a 24 mix or whatever, and then a couple of stage bottles. So
We had 20 minutes for
Rob said it was worth every penny for that Trimix dive. Yes, it was.
It was good. It was good that the owner clutched together a reverse pumping system. And
Yes.
their tanks back into the,
Yes,
that helped with the bill.
yes,
The bill was still expensive.
yes. So he drained your tank, filled it with the Trimix, and then anything you had left over, he
Pumped as much as he could.
pumped
back
as
into
much
his-
back as he could into the bank so that he could reuse it later and didn't charge you for it. So it was good.
I think that's the same thing here. He sucks it out with a straw.
Oh, no, we just played Mickey Mouse in the back.
Oh, that-
Oh, I guess, yes, so I guess just talking about prerequisites, so I mean, I think. There are certain requirements for dive, number of dives past 100 feet, number of dives for nitrox. You generally do not need to have done any decompression diving to go from like 40 to 45, and 45 to 50. You just need to have deep dives and dives on nitrox, and then there's also a total overall number of dives as well. So if you're curious about any of that, I'll just fire that off to Brad in email.
Yep.
Send it out to everyone who's here tonight.
Sure.
Yes, and then rescue diver is a prerequisite for Tec 45 and Tec 50.
Not 40. Did it used to be 40?
Oh yeah, I didn't talk about deep diver, but deep diver is also kind of, don't really get into tech concepts so much in deep diver, but it does give you kind of a introductory focus about diving past 100 feet in just some very narrow concepts about having, having specific, excuse me, specific targets for your dive and looking at some things, just having air contingencies and how, when we do run the class here, we do look at some things like, well, what happens if I'm on an 80 and I'm at, say, the stern of the Arabia at 110 feet and I'm out of air and I got to swim back to the bow. A couple of years with no stern mooring buoy. Either went straight up or you went back to the bow and up the bow line. See how much air you're going to go through sharing air on an 80. So
For anybody that's taken deep diver with me, I do start to get into concepts like SAC and R&D rates, and we'll have you do that on your deep diver course. So we'll have you doing a swim at a certain bit, figure out how much you're using, then we'll do the calculations and the formula so that you'll know. If you're familiar with the Shearwater computer, in the dive planning mode, it actually asks you, as it does on the dive planning software, what is your RMV? And so R&B go, oh, what's that? Respiratory minute volume. How much am I breathing? But equilibrated, so it really isn't dependent on what size tanks you're wearing and all that kind of stuff. Because, you know, the age-old question, well, how long can I stay? Well, that depends on a lot of factors. So RMD tries to get at eliminating those factors. You can plug it into your dive planning software and say, well, I'm going to do a dive to 165 feet. My RMD is 0.7. Or whatever you choose to put in, and the computer will tell you, oh, you're going to need this much volume. Here's what your depot plan is, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always started to introduce the concept of SAC and R&D at the deep diver level, so that at least you're familiar with some of that, and you probably know that before jumping into, say, a tech course. Now, it may have been done in Curacao, in warm water, in board shorts and a t-shirt, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And you may find your arm be a little higher up here as you get into dry suits and, you know, all the thermals in cold water. So you'll probably find a little higher, and that's quite normal. Mine is as well. But at least you're familiar with the concept, how it works, why it's important to you as a technical diver and that kind of stuff. So. Cool.
Just quick one. Is there any difference in insurance coverage when you actually engage in later into?
So for those online, the question that Miro was asking is there any difference in insurance coverage? That depends a lot on the plan. So it's a difficult one to answer. There are a number of insurance companies that will strictly not insure you if you're engaging in technical diving activities, period. They just won't insure you, say, no, it's too risky. There are others that say, as long as you're diving within the confines of your technical certification, whatever that is, we'll cover you up to this much. But there is often additional questions or interviews or whatever you call it. I'm not sure what the right way is, but when I had to do mine, I had to answer a whole bunch more questions about kind of diving I was doing, the depths I was going to, because technical diving is still pretty nichey. Rebreather diving even more nichey than that. So what you probably want to do is ask your insurance company to make sure, because the shame would be if you thought you were covered and you weren't. It's something, you know, in an unlikely event something happened and you found out you weren't covered, that would be a drag. If it just meant saying, hey, I got to answer a few more questions, or I have to pay an extra $100 a year, or I got to do this, you'd hate to find out you were disqualified from coverage because of something like that.
If you have Dan insurance, you should be covered. If you're not sure, email Dan and ask. I did see something a long time ago. They did have some kind of qualifier around gas density. So there was a point where they expected you to be using Trimix past a certain depth. But I've also been told that they don't really rigorously enforce that. So they would still.
It's a good follow-up question.
You if you heard.
I'm not sure who in the room or online has Dan, but probably lots of us do in one capacity or another. So what I will do is I will place a call to Dan and ask them this question about technical diving, and I will get the participants here and answer about what they cover, what they don't, if there are any restrictions. Probably easier than 15 of us all writing the same question. So I will write them an answer or a question. I will find out the answer, and then I will push that out to people. My reference was more like, hey, my life insurance plan, my, you know, that kind of stuff. That's really more where sort of I was going. But Manulife, RBC,
yeah, a lot of like, you know, third-party health insurance plans, they'll ask you if you scuba dive. If you say yes, they send you a secondary questionnaire.
Yeah.
Because they still consider scuba diving a high risk activity.
Life insurance before you scuba dive.
Yes,
I can make this quote.
yeah, good question though. Good question. Like anything else, you hope you never have to use it, but you know, nice when it's there.
Especially when you travel.
Yeah. For anybody that doesn't have Dan, I would strongly encourage you to look into it. I don't get any kickbacks for you buying Dan insurance, so this isn't a, I'm not a pusher on this case, other than to say, hey, their insurance is quite reasonable. They have the way Dan works, if you're not a member, you become a Dan member, and I don't remember what the current annual membership fee is, but it's about $60 or something like that. It's not overly expensive. Included in that are some basic benefits, plus you get a Alert Diver magazine, which comes out quarterly, and it's a really good magazine. There's always accident analyses. There's, things like, the rebreather fatality report. There's, all sorts of stuff that gets referenced in there that as divers we should be aware of. Highly educational, not meant to be a scare type magazine, but very educational. And then as a Dan member, you can purchase insurance at one of 3 levels, I think is their current plan. And then you just pick whatever one works best for you. There's a couple of great comparison charts on their website saying, hey, at this plan, you get this coverage, this plan, you get this plan, you get this. I think Guardian is their best plan, the one that I have a family plan. So all the kids and stuff and Tammy are all on that plan. I find it quite reasonable for the benefits and the security that I get and feel as a diver, knowing, hey, if a helicopter evac needs to be arranged halfway across the world, they will look after that for me. We just need to get in touch with them, and then they look after it. It gets turned over to them, because the people I'm with are going to be in shock, and they, if it was me, and they don't need to deal with that. Dan looks after it. They look after paying the vendors. They look after doing everything, and they sort it out with you later. That's kind of their deal. We'll look after it, just get you better. So that's worth a lot more than I think what I pay them. So anyway, it's a personal decision for everybody, but I would strongly encourage everybody to have a look.
Last one on mine. Let's say you're qualified at 45, and then you have a break of a year.
Yep.
Now you're qualified. Does PADI ask for a refresher? Is there extra cost to that? What is that?
So Miro's question was, probably much like an open water diver, if you become certified at a certain level, then take a break for whatever reason, you have kids, you got married, health issues, whatever that happened to be. Let's say I'm off doing that type of diving for a year or two. When I want to get reintroduced back, do I need to do a refresher? So there isn't a formal tech refresher like there is there's a reactivate.
You could take Tec Basics,
but yes,
as a refresher.
But you would be wise to spend some time with an instructor or somebody that was active and current, refreshing your skills, because anybody that's been around this game a lot will tell you these skills are highly perishable. I mean, highly as in, a couple months and I'm forgetting how to hold my arm when I'm doing shutdown drills. And that's not a slag at anybody. That's myself, that's Dale, it's probably David as well. You don't do it for a while and stuff starts to slip. So while there isn't a formal requirement to do it, and most places you show them a tech card, they're going to assume, hey, you understand the risks. So, unlike an open water people where they will say, hey, when was the last time you were diving? A lot of the tech places that I'm familiar with anyway, they don't ask. They just assume what the risks are in tech diving. They're extremely elevated. If you haven't done it for 2 years and you want to come and do some big dive, dude, you know what you're up for. That first couple of pages in the PADI manual.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
Spending a lot of money. I think it's a mistake, and I gotta turn around and go back to the surface. It's a silly mistake. So I mean, from a training perspective, if you've been out of the water for a year and you've been out and you have not been tech diving, there are some reassessment options. Basically run through one of the dives from the last level you completed and see where you are.
So yes,
and
there would be a cost.
You have a conversation around that, whether depending on how that dive is. Spend some time.
Much the same as reactivate. it's not mandatory. However, a lot of the resorts and stuff are now saying, hey, if you haven't dove in a year or 18 months, whatever their thing is, you got to take it. Otherwise, we're not taking you out. It's not mandatory as in written in the training standards. There's recommendations around the time frame for a reactivate, just like there are recommendations around, oh, I haven't dove in 15 years. Well, you need to take the open water course again. Well, there's nothing in the standards that say you have to. But I can tell you that most of the shop, like I won't do a reactivate for somebody that hasn't dove in 15 years. We'll just say, no, thanks, we're not going to do it. Why? Because all the liability falls on the person that's doing that reactivation or the retraining or whatever. Why would you want to take that on for nothing? You know, like, so there are industry practices and then there are standards. So reactivate and a refresh for tech, I'm going to say they're more industry standards, but not training standards. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Rob said, oh, I have an exclusion clause on a new term life policy. Dan is my supplementary. So really ask your insurance provider, make sure you're covered for the kind of diving that you're going to be doing, regardless of where you get that. Good. Guys, if there are no more questions, we can wrap this up. As a follow-up, as I said, I will connect with Dan, find out what their approach is towards people doing technical diving. And I will get that answer back to the folks that attended here tonight. Maybe you can put it on a little one-pager or something and put on the website or something like that. It's a good question, well worth having an answer for. So we'll do that. David, thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much for taking us through the new programs. If anybody is interested in actively pursuing one of the programs, please let us know. At the moment, we sort of schedule these based on who we know is in them, what their schedules are like. We'll often, have a meeting with you, find out what days are good. The ratios are fairly small in these types of courses, as you can imagine. This is not I'm taking a whole gaggle of people out to go and do technical diving. It is 3-to-1, David?
They sort of relax a
little
bit.
bit.
So I think a lot of them are 4-to-1 or 6-to-1 now with the
For certain dives. Yeah, with a certified assistant. But generally speaking, these are done in smaller groups. Because doing them in big groups is a bit impractical in most areas. So if you're interested, please let us know and we'll start a conversation with the appropriate instructors and such to get you on your way in whatever time frame you might be looking at, whether that's for a truck trip or whether that's for SEBA, whether that's for local, doesn't really matter. But let's start a dialogue about your own individual plan and we'll give you a hand getting there. Good. You're getting some online kudos too, David. So that's great. And guys, thank you. I'm just going to stop sharing this for a moment. There we go. See everybody again. Gallery. There we go. Guys, thank you all for attending. Jay, I know you jumped in a little bit later, but we have recorded the whole session. So in a couple of days, it will get posted onto the website so you can listen to the first part at your leisure. And we'll go from there. All right. Guys, thank you very much. Appreciate you all attending. We'll hopefully see you at one of the upcoming. Yeah, David walked in the corner there. Yeah. Hopefully we'll see you at a new one. The next one, as we mentioned, is the one with Dr. Pollock. Early February the 6th, I think. 7th. February 7th. So we'll look forward to seeing lots of you there. We decided, I think when we were chatting last, this is his 10th anniversary of doing a Winter Wednesday for us. So kind of a bit of a milestone, which is good. He loves seeing people in our room here. He always asks me for a count. It's usually pretty good because he's probably one of the biggest draws in terms of speakers we have. If you have never heard him before, some of the guys online have been and attended with Dr. Pollack. If you have not, he is one of the smartest gentlemen I know. He spent basically his whole life doing basically decompression / recompression research. He was the head chief research scientist at Divers Alert Network for a number of years, now works at the University of Laval. But aside from being smart, he's very entertaining. He's got a great personality. He's got an awesome sense of humor, well worth listening to. And some of his past ones are up on our website and stuff as well. Always a pleasure to have him on board. So hopefully we'll see lots of you then. All right, good, cool. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Good night to the guys online. Appreciate you attending.
Good night.